Well, welcome, my friend. I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. You are a busy man, and I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to let me ask you a few questions.
All right. I'll
Yeah.
do my best.
Oh, okay. Well, you are the first interview of this Somebody Must Come Preaching preacher conversation segment. So you're my friend, and I thought I would ask you to be the first person that we would ask questions to. How long have we known each other, and when did our friendship start?
Yeah, I believe it was when I first came to Annapolis. So I'm assuming it has to be about 35 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe about 33, 34 years. I probably was here for about a year. Probably the same time you came to Hopewell. Yeah,
Okay.
we met at the funeral. Yeah, I believe it was at Julius Stevens' funeral.
Yeah. I remember that. We were checking each other out, looking each other up and down, trying to measure, uh,
Yes, sir.
trying to measure one another. Okay.
Who's the greatest among us?
Yeah, right. Well, I defer to you, my friend. So that was well, I came to Hopewell in 1987. And I'm not sure
Yeah,
if it was 88 or 89 when Brother Stevens passed. And
right.
but I do remember meeting you at that time. So and you've been the minister of this congregation since that time. So let's get started. Who is Douglas Anthony Goodman? Tell us, those in the brotherhood, and especially on the East Coast, Mid-Atlantic, they know you. You are the dean of preachers in the Mid-Atlantic. But for those who might watch and don't know you,
Mhm.
who is Douglas Anthony Goodman?
I like to say I'm just a nobody trying to tell everybody about somebody. But I'm just an old country boy living in the city. Grew up in the city of Baltimore, born in North Carolina. My parents migrated up here. I grew up in the school system and in the hood, if you will. And I was blessed to be able to come in contact with the church. My parents obeyed the gospel under the evangelist Humphrey Faust when I was about 5, 6 years old. So therefore, they raised me up in the church. And during that time, I was able to do a number of things, being an entrepreneur and going to vocational schools and trade schools and things along that line. And so all I know is the Church of Christ. And so I was blessed to be able to train under Humphrey Faust. And so that has shaped me and molded me. Not only him, but there's probably about 15 other men that had a role in molding me. And so I think I'm the man today because of those men that was in my life.
Okay, well, that's impressive. I appreciate you sharing that. So you said all you know is the Church of Christ. So you were raised in the Church of Christ. Is that right?
Right. That's right.
Well, tell us, when were you baptized, and what led to your conversion
Mhm.
experience? What was going on at that time, even though you were raised in the church. But
Right.
how did you come about obeying the gospel?
Well, the problem is a combination of things. Sister Thoughts had a class called the Junior Bees, and we always brag about being in that class when we were young. And so, of course, you're going to get taught real well. And there were other teachers as well. And then I had my parents. And then, of course, growing up in the church, you almost expected to get baptized, you know. And I was baptized, I think it was probably about 10 or 11 or something like that when I made the decision to be baptized. And of course, when you're young, you don't always understand it all, you know, but you know that you need to do it because that's what you're supposed to do, being brought up in a Christian family, you know. So I did make that decision early. And who knows that I was going to turn out to be a preacher. You know, I had I had an encounter with a young lady who I grew up with, a brother, and she returned to the church, and she was shocked I was the preacher. You know, because we just little bad boys running around the church doing stuff, getting in trouble, you know, things like that. You know, but yeah, out of all those that were in the class, I probably was the only one. Well, if not became a preacher, still is one.
Okay, okay. Now you mentioned, you said the junior B's. Was it the junior B's?
Junior B, yeah, we had a class of about 20, 30. It was called the Junior B's.
Okay.
And when you made the Sister Faust class, then you were required to learn scriptures and things along that line. And so whenever we have a reunion somewhere, maybe like in a funeral or something, we all would talk about that. You know, who was a part of the Junior B's, and you know, things along that line. It was really an honor to be a part of her class, because once you get to her class, you're ready to be baptized. She's gonna teach you something.
Now you mentioned Sister Faust. I know who she is, and then those on East Coast, Mid Atlantic know who Sister Faust is. But tell us more about Sister Faust and her husband, Brother Humphrey Faust. Share a little bit more about those.
Yeah,
two.
man. Well, you know, it'd take a long time to really talk about them. They were two to behold. You know, the kind of example that they set. It was almost like a mom and a pop of the church. You know, where everybody respected them, and you relied on them for advice, and the example that they set, and how they love people and love the church. They didn't have a children of their own, so you know the church was their children. You know, in a sense. And you can always depend on encouragement. She just had a sweet spirit, you know, and she was a very good wife. And of course, you need that if you're going to be successful in ministry. And so we was always encouraged, you know, by her sweetness and her generosity, you know. And even to this day, you know, she's in her 80s, but everybody love her. You know, they wait on her hand and foot because she had that kind of spirit. So
Yeah,
we always enjoy just watching her.
yeah. I was at the Central Church a few months ago, and got a chance to see her, and just hearing her voice, she just makes you smile. She just as sweet as she can be. Now tell me a little bit about, or tell us a little bit about her husband, who he was, how he got started, and his tenure with the Central Church of Christ in Baltimore.
Right, right. Well, he was when I came along, he was there. I think when we came along, they was in a storefront. But he was they call him two Texans. You know, Brother Faust was a football player, ex-football player, so he's a big 6'4" guy, you know, but he was a friendly giant, man. He just loved people. He especially loved Black people. You know, he just loved it. That's one of the things that brought him to the city of Baltimore, because he just saw so many of us. And he just really believed, you know, during that time, you know, with segregation, all that stuff that was going on, you know, in the 50s and spilling over into the 60s, you know, he just really believed that Black folk deserved to go to heaven as well, you know, and he was determined to go where his people was in order to establish a congregation, or in his place where he came. He was in the military, and I think he was visiting the church for worship, and the preacher that was there was home asleep, you know, and I think one of the older sisters asked him, was he a preacher? And he said, yes, ma'am. He said, well, you got to preach today. You know, he preached, and I think he came back maybe a year later. Then he became the preacher, and I watched him take 15 people and turn it into 1,500.
Yeah.
You know, just evangelism and discipleship.
All right.
Mm-hmm. A friendly giant, full of wisdom.
Yeah. Brother Faust did a number of meetings for us here in Hopewell, and I was honored to do a number of meetings for him in Baltimore. And matter of fact, Brother Faust is really responsible for me staying in Hopewell as long as I did. You know, I remember he and Sister Faust and my wife and I, we went out to the restaurant, Piccadilly's, and we were just sitting around talking, and I was just saying, oh, this is just a pit stop for me. I'm not going to be here long. And then Brother Faust in his way, he said, well, you know, sometimes it's just good to pitch your tent and stay a while, you know. And
Yeah.
that was good advice. So Sister Faust was influential in you obeying the gospel, and Brother Faust is your father in the gospel. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Um,
he baptized me.
and
He
well, tell us a little bit about, you know, we don't use the term a lot in churches of Christ about being called to the ministry, but I'm sure that Brother Faust trained you. But give us a little background about your call to the ministry and his impact on your ministry. How did you know you wanted to be a preacher?
Well, it probably took some time because I really wasn't thinking about being a preacher. I think he might have challenged me. You know, people talking about getting a call, and I was sharing with the group not too long ago. I said, the Lord didn't call you, the treasurer called you. That's why you're over there. You know, but you know, we're called by the gospel. So when we look at that theory, is that when you get involved with ministry, and because the Central Church was an evangelistic church and a discipleship church, Matthew 28 was always the foremost in his mind, whatever we were striving to do. And so I had people like, you know, Tyler Gwynn and Elmer Simile and Nate Hawkins and Steve Ozan and you know, Tyrone Adams and you know, Mike Edison. And I had a group of men that worked with me. Tyler discipled me more so, and the rest of them just added to the training and got me excited about evangelism. So that's where I got my street training from, just getting out there teaching and baptizing folk and bringing them in and discipling them. And I fell in love with that. And I guess I was probably recommended by the brethren to be able to sit at Brother Faust's feet when he wanted to start a preacher's training class. And so I was kind of one of the first ones earmarked to go out of the class that we had. Matter of fact, I was opposed to go to Delaware, but they sent Gwen to Delaware, and the next year they sent me. The next time they sent me to Annapolis. Well, it was Cambridge then Annapolis in '85. But technically, I wasn't really thinking about being a preacher. I was kind of convinced that we needed somebody to go out into the mission field, and because I knew how to baptize folk, and I knew how to disciple folk, and I knew how to organize ministry because I had ministries I was in charge of. I was mainly in charge of the evangelism ministry, and we had great success. We would baptize, man, you know, 100 people every year. And I think maybe a couple of years I did it, 150, 175, you know, so I didn't know how to do something. So that's what Faust was looking at, you know, do you know how to do the ministry? You know, I probably couldn't preach a lick, but I knew how to get out there. I think I'm still practicing learning how to preach. But I knew when they dropped me off in that city, I knew how to go out there and knock on doors and teach people and baptize folk, because the majority of our people that we have now, we baptize. We have very, very few transferees. I don't really worry about transferees, you know.
Yeah, yeah. So it sounds like you were involved in the work, and then they saw something in you that led to your start in preaching. So they saw a gift in you. And
right.
Okay, how often did that preaching class meet? You know, and
on Friday nights.
Yeah.
On Friday nights, about 2 hours, and he would teach us the fundamentals of preaching, train us how to write lessons, and give us opportunities to present lessons. And then we had the kicker was that most people don't understand. That on Saturdays we went out door knocking.
Okay.
You know, where we had to learn how to do what we were not just stand in the pulpit, but learn how to go out and present these lessons. You know, and then of course when we started church planning ministry, these were lessons that we had to use when we went out to plant churches to teach people as well. So those were the practicing times, you know, and then it helped you to see if you were cut out for this.
Okay, real good. Well, let's segue into that. I want to come back to preaching again, and ask another question about preaching. But you mentioned church planting. The Annapolis church is a church plant. You kind of stay under the radar, and I think that's intentional. You stay under the radar, but share with us Central's philosophy and your a brief history of the Annapolis congregation being a church plant, because we hear that a lot about planting churches, and
Right.
but it's done differently sometimes than it was 30, 35, 40 years ago.
Yeah, I don't know if they don't understand it, or if we don't maybe not produce the men that's able to do it. Well, times have changed too. You know, what Faust's philosophy was to build a strong home base where you are able to have resources to support young men that you train and send out. You know, I was supported for about 3 or 4 years. You know, they would give me $350 a week, you know, so I wouldn't starve. His philosophy was, if you had what it took, we can give you a Bible, a map, and a parachute, drop you off somewhere, come back 5 years, and there'd be a church there, if you have what it takes. If you don't, you'd be laying alongside the road dead, starved to death. You know, that's what kind of his philosophy. But he believed in building a strong home base. You know, building a strong was important for the training center, and to be able to support these young men that went out. See, a lot of young men won't start from zero because there's no support. There's no older preachers. There's no large congregation willing to put the funds aside to support a young man. So most young men, and they're concerned right now because they got to go get a full-time job somewhere and do ministry part-time, you know, or they got to go looking for a church that already has a salary for them. Not that anything is wrong with that. But the thought is that that's what's happening, and then nobody's really planting churches anymore. They're just splitting off and starting churches, you know, for different reasons.
Okay.
But his philosophy was to have a strong home base so we can support these young men.
And so the Annapolis church was planted in what year? What year was that?
87.
87?
Yeah, we were the third church plant.
Okay. And that makes Capital Church how old now? This is 20.
Yeah, we just had we just this past August was 35 years. You my preacher, you was there.
Yeah. Well, I think I was there for the 30th and the 35th, or maybe the 25th and the 35th.
25th. Yeah, I had
Okay.
Keaton on the 30th. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it's an honor. It's an honor, and I applaud you because you know, my ministry went in a different course. I always went into an established work, and probably when you interview me on this segment, I'll share, you know, my pitfalls of going into an established work versus a plant work. But I applaud you because you've done extremely well with the church plant. And one of the things that I admire about you is how you've been able to train preachers or train young men to become preachers, become preacher supporters. Can you share a little bit about that? How did you, was that something that just fell into your lap, or was that intentional when it comes to training preachers?
Yeah, I think it's both, really. I think, like I was saying in one seminar, that most of the time you're going to pick up the pattern of the guy who trained you. And so because Faust was the kind of fellow, or Humphrey Faust was the kind of guy who loved working with young men, it was intentional. He had a vision. His vision was to plant churches up and down the East Coast, you know. So all the congregations that we have planted, you know, from North Carolina up to, you know, Pennsylvania, you know, it was his dream to have young men out there preaching in areas where there was no church. You don't go run somebody's backyard and start a church, and to be able to do that. So being a part of that, kind of helped me to be able to know that I need young men, and the older I started to getting, I realized, I got to get to the point where I got to look out for this church when I'm gone, whether I'm gone dead, or if I decide not to preach no more, or if I'm sick, or if I want to do gospel meetings. I need somebody that can take care of home that I have trained. And that's important, because that means, like Paul said about Timothy, I don't have nobody who naturally care for the church. And if you have a guy you're working with, they're going to pick up your mannerisms and your spirit and your way of doing things. And it's much better. So I think that I kind of wanted to do that, but then and falling into it would mean that there were young men under me that I baptized. 4 of them I baptized, but one of them, Newton, was already a member of the church, but he wasn't preaching or being trained to preach. And so once I saw that they had, like they saw in me, the ability to do ministry and the eagerness to do this kind of stuff, then I kind of just took them under my wing. We just started developing a relationship and started studying.
Yeah.
Started doing ministry on the street. So I provided the street knowledge. I encourage all of them went to school, because I can't teach them everything. But I do have some advantages from start from zero. So I look at ministry maybe a different way than most, I guess.
Well, one of the things that keeps, I hear you saying, is doing ministry. You do ministry, and I think that's important. And you don't learn ministry in school. You learn it on the ground, hands-on, that kind of thing, and it's intentional. Before I move on to getting back to preaching, what advice would you give to someone who is interested in ministry or just getting started in ministry? Do you have any advice?
There's plenty of advice. To have a relationship with a preacher. You have so many, they want to preach, but they're not in love with preachers. Preaching is not something you do, it's who you are. So you have to enjoy. I enjoy hanging around Brother Faust. He used to say, a lot of things, but one thing he said, you can't tell the greatness of a mountain sitting under the foot of it. So when I would travel with him and watch him, and I saw how people responded to him, so that made me appreciate him even more. And I used to love going into his office. That's why I fell in love with books, because I would always be in his office looking at his books, and he helped me fall in love with reading. And so he would always give me stuff to read and assignments to do. And so I started to imitate him. Even when I came to Annapolis, a bus ministry, different ministries I started establishing, because that's what they did. There was a multi-ministry church, and they reached people through ministry, and that was the focus, So, and then of course, when I look at some of my young men and I go visit them, I see them doing really the same thing. The ministries that they were involved with, and learn from me, that I learned from him, then they're doing ministries, and of course their work grows because of that.
All right. Well,
I would encourage them to get involved with an older preacher, learn how to do ministry, and and be well-rounded. Learn about preaching, learn about ministry, learn about evangelism. Don't just focus on one area, on each area.
Well, I'm a little envious, because I see you got a lot of pictures behind you of preachers. I don't see my picture up there, and I thought we were friends.
I need you in pounds.
Oh, okay. All right. Look.
Yeah, that's about 4 or 5 of you up here.
Okay. Well. Everything's good then. Okay. Everything is good. I just thought I would lighten the mood a little bit. As we close out this segment, do you remember the first sermon that you preached? This segment is called "Somebody Must Come Preaching."
Yeah, I do.
So I want to close out by talking about preaching well, and then I really want to close out with your assessment over the current state of the church. But what was the first sermon that you preached? And let's start there. That stands out. Okay.
Yeah, I did a lesson. I'm trying to remember where it is in Luke chapter 7. The parable of the creditor. 36 following, when Jesus was at Simon the Pharisee's house.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, the woman came over the wall and started washing his feet with her tears and wiping her hair. That was one of my first sermons I did. I can't remember what I called it, but that was one of my first sermons. And of course, I'm kind of known for humor in my lessons because I was a comedian before I was a Christian.
Okay.
But the thought is, I just use that to my advantage, and I think that probably blesses my ministry. I mean, I'm a serious person, but I have a sense of humor. My philosophy is you got to laugh to keep from crying, and so I've always injected humor into it. And of course, being a storyteller, that's what Brother Faust was, a storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very good with sticking with the text, and he always believed in preaching Christ. He always said, let yourself be the butt of the joke. Don't try to invite nobody, and so he always kept it clean, kept it straightforward, kept it biblical. Ain't no spit shine, jumping around, running around, hollering, all this kind of stuff. He would just preach the gospel, sit down. He said, you don't have to be eternal to be immortal.
Yeah.
They give just enough so they come back Sunday night.
I thought you were gonna say you don't have to be eternal to be effective, but immortal sounds right too. Yeah. Well, let me ask this. All of us probably have our favorite preachers, or if we don't have a favorite preacher, there's a sermon that we heard someone else preach that stands out. Do you have a sermon that someone else preached that kind of that stands out to you?
I don't know if I could say.
Yeah.
I'm just, I'm the type of person, I believe you cannot learn from one person, even though I may contribute a lot of success that I had to Brother Fouts. But he's been dead for a while. I've been in Annapolis for 35 years. There's a lot of him in me. I still keep his name alive as much as I can.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe you need a calamity of people like you in my life. The Bible talked about the safety and the multitude of counselors. Mm-hmm. I think there's safety in the multitude of preachers. You can learn something from every preacher. I try to make sure that every brother I come in contact with who's a minister of the gospel, I can get something from him that can help strengthen and mature my ministry. So I don't know if I would ever just put one preacher at the top of that list or one sermon that was preached. I just, I don't know. I can't right now.
Yeah.
Think of it. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned earlier that you use a lot of humor in your sermons. What's your approach to sermon prep and preaching? How do you, and when you in your training with your men, what are some of the things that you share with them as far as sermon prep?
Right. Well, there's two things really. Number one, the sermon ought to grab you. You get a sermon out of reading and studying, and then different books you read, you get thoughts and ideas. So I will have a folder. If I get different thoughts and ideas, I write it down. Maybe make a copy of that page, a copy of that page, copy of that page, put them in a folder, and I'll start that on Monday. So I'm just collecting material. I'm always using at least 8 commentaries and 8 translations on any particular subject, so I can kind of see, the pros and the cons or the true school of thoughts for that particular text. I try to use a lot of outline alliteration, always looking for illustrations, and so you're looking for stuff, and as you stumble across stuff, I may just label it and save it. So I may not need it right now, but I mean, this is a preach down the road or whatever, And so I'm always got stuff in my briefcase, because by the time Friday, Saturday come, I know what I'm going to do. I just got to start organizing all the information that I have collected. That's the first thought. And the second one would be whatever the need of the church is. If I'm preaching on topics or preaching on particular books of the Bible. So it depends on what my strategy is for that particular year.
That sounds good. Yeah, yeah. All right, good, good. Some preachers are topical, some are narrative preachers, some are like expositional preachers. And but I agree with you. I think that whatever approach one takes, you got to meet the needs of church.
Right.
You got to meet the needs of your local congregation. All right, that's good. Well, this question probably deserves a panel of its own, but it's part of this format. You're in the 60-30 crowd. You're over 60 and you've been in one place over 30 years. So I'm gonna put another category. You've been preaching more than 30 years. So you're in three categories. You're over 60 years old. You've been preaching more than 30 years, but you're in that category of a select few men who have preached at one place for 30 plus years.
Mm.
So you've seen a lot, and how would you describe the current state of the church? This is it's a podcast, it's a discussion. This is not meant to shoot at anybody, but maybe we can help one another with different perspectives. So with your 30 plus years ministry, 30 plus years at one congregation, how would you sum up the current state of the church?
Oh boy, you hate to be like, authority on this thing, because sometimes all we know is our own area, our own city, how it's evolving and the challenges that we have to meet. If we talk about training young men, if we don't bridge the gap and allow them to be trained, then you wonder about the future of the church. When I look at my young men, I'm happy because I feel like they are solid, and then I can go way out in left field somewhere, and so you're just concerned about, the church taking in a different direction, and especially when they don't even call themselves the Church of Christ anymore. Sometimes you may be a little concerned about that, where people are more ashamed of the church than they are for the church. And then the blending in with denominationalism, this can be a concern, losing the identity or the distinction of the church, where the church can't be the church no more because we are scared to say, sometimes I jokingly go to places and say, is it okay to say Church of Christ? Because, you have people now who don't feel like that is the name of the church anymore. And of course, the way things are evolving, where, when you go on vacation, you're very careful, even among us where you go, And so sometimes that can be a concern, but I'm glad of autonomy. So I just try to focus on, and we talk about this sometimes, I try to just focus on my own work, try to get these folk in Annapolis to go to heaven, and I can't be overly concerned about what the brotherhood is doing. I try to use what little influence I have in my area, to try to encourage people to stay biblical and stay on track. You're not always successful, but I think older preachers need to encourage the younger preachers to stay biblical, and I think the church will be all right because it belongs to God. God's going to take care of the church. Sometimes we think we run the church and the church belongs to us, but that's not the mentality that we should have. So, the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. He said, I remove your candlestick,
Well, yeah, yeah. Well, my friend, we could talk for many more hours. And one of the things I've said, when you were born, your name fits your personality. Your name is Goodman. You are a good man, and you've been a good friend to me over the years. You've been there. I've cried on your shoulder many times, and You responded, and you still act like you love me, so I appreciate you.
Well, you've been a good friend. That's
Yeah,
what Gilman would say. Friends are far too few in between.
yeah,
That's and they rare, you know. So you gotta
yeah.
have.
In this business, man, some people see the glamour and they think it's that preachers don't hurt, don't cry, but you've been there for me when I've had my moments, and I
The same with me.
appreciate.
You know, I've been through my trials, my tribulations, and you talked about going to different churches, but it is probably even tougher when you have the same church. I
Yeah,
think that's why sometimes people don't stay because you got to deal with the same people for 35 years, and you got to always come up with fresh ideas,
yeah,
come up with different sermons. You can't preach the same sermons you've been preaching. You gotta be on your feet all the time, and you really gotta love the people. Sometimes that's hard to do. You really gotta love these people, and that's what Brother Faust did because he loved these people. That's why he stayed.
mhm.
And one time somebody asked him, well, how come you didn't go to another church? Because he had opportunities to go other places. Once you start doing gospel meetings, other people hearing you, people gonna try to steal your preacher,
Yeah,
offering a deal on the side, stuff like that. And he made a statement to me one time that kind of helped me stay where I am. He said, I guess I was too dumb to think I could go somewhere else.
well, yeah, yeah,
He said, where I'm going to go. I mean, it's problems everywhere you go.
yeah, yeah,
That
yeah.
time problem.
Yeah, yeah. Well, as I said, we could talk more and more about that and everything. But man, I've enjoyed this session, and thank you for taking time out to share with us your ministry, uh, the success of the Capital Church of Christ, how Brother and Sister Faust has influenced your ministry, and just trust and pray that those who will watch this maybe have been encouraged, and we're going to do more of these and just have conversation with ministers of the gospel. So again, Brother Goodman, thank you for coming on and talking to us today, and we
Thank
pray.
you, brother, for having me. I feel honored.
Yeah, well, you contributed to the book Somebody Must Come Preaching, and I thought this would be good just to reach out to those preachers. And let me close by saying this: I just feel that preachers in churches of Christ are second to none. We may not have the fanfare or the popularity that our religious neighbors have, and sometimes we're in a vacuum, and then the vacuum that we're in, we think that's something to brag about, but compared to how many folk are lost, we're still in a vacuum. So I hope that this will give ministers in the Church of Christ some exposure outside of our brotherhood. And at the same time, we're partnering with the School of Religious Studies. And Lloyd Harris is the president there, and is giving his school some exposure as well. So again, my friend, my brother, thank you, and may God bless you.
All right, my brother. Bless you too, Crusoe.
All right, take care, man. All right.
All right.